That's a tough act to follow, for sure. So thank you guys. I'm Robert Cotto Jr. I'm an elected board member in Hartford, Connecticut, and I'm also a senior fellow at Connecticut Voices for Children, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization. Wanted to kind of talk to you guys tonight.
Talk into the mic.
I'm talking to the mic. Thanks for the feedback. There you go. Thanks. All right, good. So, can you hear me now? Yeah. All right, good. I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about my evolution as a board member in Hartford and coming from being a teacher to more of an advocate. I'm originally from Connecticut, and I went to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, which is kind of like pretty far from growing up in Connecticut in a small town. And I almost actually did the teacher education program there, similar to the ed program here at Conn College. I almost did it, and I actually missed a series of deadlines, which explains a lot of my college life. But I missed a series of deadlines and wasn't able to do the teacher ed program as an undergrad. And so I was in senior year, and I actually had two possibilities. One was go to Teach for America, and I actually applied and kind of did the whole thing. And I also applied to do a master's degree at Harvard Graduate School of Ed in their teacher ed program, like a fifth-year sort of master's program. I think I definitely took the right road in terms of doing the Harvard Graduate School of Ed, where it was a real serious and rigorous program that really asked us to be reflective teachers and to be advocates and to kind of speak out and be teacher leaders. That was really like the thing, back then. In retrospect, I'm very glad I didn't do Teach for America, and not because of like kind of the hype, the problems that it's had and the hype that it's had recently, but there were problems even then. I mean, this was 10 years ago, and they were in the interviews. They were asking us they asked me a question about. It was so ridiculous and so absurd. They said to me, "What if you wanted to do a field trip for your students, but you had no money to do it? What would you do?" And kind of on the fly, I said, I guess I would try to get people from the museum to come to the school and kind of do like a kind of rotating or floating exhibition or something. I really didn't know. And I think what they were going after was they wanted me to talk about raising money. I think that was the right answer, and I gave them, I guess, the wrong answer. But they asked for my transcripts, a couple of weeks later, and I said, you know what? I got into Harvard. Thank you very much. Good luck with that program. So that was kind of my road to being a teacher. I did my master's, got certified in Massachusetts, and then found a job here in Connecticut in an interdistrict magnet school in Bloomfield, which is also a chef school. And the chef school is a school meant to integrate children by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, and use school choice to do that rather than resegregate kids, which is what some of the other choice programs tend to do. So I taught there for about 7 years, and earned tenure. Was a social studies teacher for 9th grade, social studies, world history, and also sociology for 12th graders. And for the most part, I would say my first 3 years were terribly difficult. Even though I knew the content, you're still learning to teach, over the course of those years. And it really wasn't until my 4th or 5th year that I really felt like I was like doing it and like teaching. I was like a real teacher. I mean, obviously it was a real teacher because they throw you in there the first day and they say teach, and that's like a real teacher. But I meant, I guess what I mean is that you don't really hit your stride, I think, until some of those, really 3rd, 4th, 5th year. And so, if there's any sort of advice to some of the teachers coming up, it's you're not going to be great your first year. Some people are. I mean, there's a few people that are great, but you're going to hit your stride. And I think when I really hit my stride was when I started to speak up a lot in school. It may have coincided with getting tenure, I'm not sure, but it may have been part of that. And I started to speak up more at meetings in school. One particular thing that I really called the principal on was she wanted to go to being an IB school, an International Baccalaureate school. And the way it was sold to us was that the guy that came and he was going to explain it, he said, IB is basically like the same thing you're doing now. And I said, really? Well, it's the same thing that we're doing now. then why do we have to do IB? We're already doing it. So we don't have to go through a year-long or 2-year-long process if we're already doing IB. And so I kind of started to push back on the principal there, and she didn't really like it. And she did a survey which showed that 80% of the teachers really favored IB. And it was those sort of things that I started to get in kind of a little bit of trouble there. And so I kind of carried that over into politics. And I think another aspect of being a great teacher is knowing the politics of where you're at. And so I live in Hartford, and Hartford's a fairly unusual place. It has a school board, but 5 of the folks are appointed by the mayor of Hartford on the 9-person school board, and 4 people are elected, and I'm one of the elected folks that's on there. Okay, so 5 and 4. So you guys can do the math, and you can basically figure it out that the mayor essentially controls the school board in Hartford. There's only one other town in Connecticut that does this. New Haven does it, and the mayor picks all of the board members, which makes you wonder, why in the world does he even need to pick up a school board? Why doesn't he just get rid of it and just run the thing himself? I mean, let's be real here, right? So those 2 towns have those, what they call mixed boards or mayoral control boards. The rest of Connecticut gets democracy, though, and that's kind of an interesting twist on this whole thing. So I was following politics in town and seeing a lot of things in my school, actually. I was hearing kids that would come to my school in October and November, and they said, I used to go to one of the regular Hartford schools, now I go to the magnet school, and back in that school, we had 3 study halls in a day. Or they couldn't find like a school for me, and it took them like a week to find me a school to actually go to. So I was hearing these things and kind of being interested. A local political director for the Working Families Party, which is a third party, kind of a labor party that's in Connecticut, said, hey, do you want to run for school board? I said, sure, let's do it. So I ran. We won. Working Families that year, in 2009, we got more votes. We had 3 candidates. We got more votes than the Democrats did in a Democratic city. So our 3 candidates had more. Unfortunately, though, we split. So they got 2 people onto the Board of Ed, and we got 2 people onto the Board of Ed. So it's kind of like a split thing. We didn't get all 3. It's kind of a weird thing how the math works out. So I ran for school board, and it was like the big city, right? You're in Hartford, capital city, you're in the school board, everyone wants to know you, everyone wants to meet you, the mayor wants to have dinner with you. This is pretty big stuff, right? And I'm just like a teacher, right? Just a teacher, regular person. And I won, and at first I kind of bought into the hype. What Anthony was saying earlier was happening in Hartford. They were saying, we're reforming the school system. We're giving parents more school choice. We're rating kids by test results. We're rating schools by test results. They weren't rating teachers yet at that point by test results. That came later. And they said, all of this is making the test results just go straight up the roof. Historic gains. We've never seen these gains ever in Connecticut history on the Connecticut Mastery Test. Mm-hmm. And I kind of believed it, and I said, okay, well, I mean, that's what they're telling us, that's what's happening. So we were at a meeting in 2010, it was the fall of 2010, and the superintendent came to the Board of Ed and said, oh, by the way, I should name the superintendent. His name is Stephen Adamowski is his name, okay? He said, hey, you guys know what's going on. He said, I want you to sign this document. There are 15 targets on here. When I mean by targets, I mean like numbers. So like, he said 40% of the kids will be proficient in the math test in 3rd grade. 50% of the kids will be proficient on the reading test in 4th grade. So there's all these kind of random numbers that were thrown out there. He said, I want you to pass this Board of Education because these are the numbers that I want to be rated on, and my administrators will be rated on it. And if we do well, we'll get a bonus based on each target that's here. So I said to him in the meeting, I said, well, can't this be gamed or can't this be manipulated? It seems so hand-picked. I mean, 3rd grade reading, 4th grade math, 5th grade writing, I mean, why those? And he kind of brushed it off and said, no. This is part of our accountability structure. This is our data dashboard. This is how I want to be held accountable. All this kind of nonsense. A lot of buzzwords, a lot of cliches. So I said, okay, fine, and didn't kind of left the meeting and was like still thinking about it. Went home and went to my wife. She's a PhD candidate, very close. She's great at statistics. I said, Bianca, let's look at this stuff. So we started looking more closely on the state's database, because the funny thing is, they create all these numbers and they show you all these numbers, but they actually kind of give themselves away because they give more information than they probably need to. So I started looking more closely, and what I found was absolutely remarkable. From the time that Adamowski had started as superintendent to that point, 2010, the number and percentage of children taking that regular Connecticut mastery test in reading and math had dropped. There were hundreds of kids in each grade that had basically stopped taking the test. So I looked closely. I was like, what's going on here? Bianca looked at it. She's like, I don't know, what's going on? So we had to look more closely. And I had to do more investigation because I was a new teacher. I didn't know the history of what had happened before. And basically, it was actually a really simple thing. The federal government and the state had basically changed the rules about which kids had to take the regular test. And in 2007, they actually said, reversing a previous opinion, they basically said kids with disabilities that weren't going to pass the math or the reading test, because of their disability, could be selected to be put on a special test called the modified assessment in math or reading. So, I mean, it seems a humane thing to do, I guess. If that's what their IEP says they should do, okay, fine. But what we found was that the great majority of these historic test gains in Hartford were a result of simply taking these children out of the regular testing pool and putting them on to this other test. And so we confronted the superintendent later in the fall, and I think it was late 2010, and we said, we want to know what happened here. And he got red in the face. It was at a board meeting, public board meeting, videotape, audio tape, everything. And he said, well, this is for kids that can't even pick up a pencil. That's what this test is for. Kids that can't even use a pencil. I said, that's funny because the kids have to use a computer to take the test.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And the meeting was very contentious. I probably overstepped my boundaries and I was mad. Everyone was mad. And when I asked for the video of the meeting later, I learned from the media director, who's still the media director, and you can Google him if you'd like. He said it had been damaged. The only video of a meeting in my 4 years as a Board of Ed member that has ever been damaged. I don't know how you would damage a video. I mean, we're using digital, little digital tapes these days. They're not the old big VHS tapes anymore, so I don't really know how it could have been damaged. But anyway, so I wrote an article in the Hartford Current about this, and it was an op-ed in the other opinion section. They like to marginalize other opinion. They call it other opinion. We did, and I basically said, this is what happened. And one of the reasons that I felt as a teacher at the time that what they did was just simply unethical. I mean, if you look at the Connecticut Code of professional educators, I forget the exact term of it, it says one of the bullet points of being a professional educator in the Code of Ethics is not taking credit for something that you didn't do. So it's very clear. I mean, it says you shouldn't be taking credit for things that are not your work. This wasn't his work. So I wrote an article. We went to Harvard Graduate School of Ed, my wife and I, and we did a presentation for the Alumni of Color Conference at Harvard. And we were in front of a statistician, and statisticians don't really get excited about things, but what he said was, looks like you have a distortion there. And I said, yeah, that's an understatement, okay. But here's the key point though. Compared to the other towns and cities in Connecticut, Hartford looked like it was improving. Hartford looked like the model. if we just rank all the schools 1 to number 45, if we give parents more choice, if we give teachers bonuses to improve test results, if we get rid of an elected board of education, if we clear out all that messiness about what schools ought to be doing and what educators, all that touchy-feely educator stuff, as like Anthony was saying, get rid of all that stuff. Let's run it like a business. If we can do all that, you'll see these beautiful results. Right? So Hartford looked like the model. So fast forwarding a couple of years, and I actually left teaching, and it was a tough decision. Part of it was kind of what I was being asked to do at work. I didn't feel was appropriate. I mean, it became more and more test preparation, and that wasn't what I was interested in doing. I wanted to get into education to help kids, to kind of spark their interest, kind of be a role model, and it just wasn't working. So I left. And there's another reason in that being a school board person, I was at meetings till like 12 o'clock at night, arguing with these non-educators about education issues, and it got contentious. And I had a really kind of dual lifestyle, so I said I have to really, kind of take some time for myself. So I went to a group called Connecticut Voices for Children, and did some writing there. And as soon as I had started in 2012, the governor of Connecticut said he wants to do a big education reform bill. And it was called like an Act Concerning Educational Competitiveness. And when I read it for my job, I said, the light bulbs went off. And maybe half to 60% of the stuff that they wanted to do in that bill was stuff that they had done at Hartford. The ranking of the schools, the bonuses for the teachers, the school choice stuff, even some of the language, the district performance index, which is what they had a school performance index in Hartford, the same exact stuff. And I said, there is no one in the world that could have written this besides someone out of state or Stephen Adamowski. There's no way. Because there's no one with that level of sophistication. Not that it worked, but sophistication in terms of the language and in terms of like the ideas that were there. And so we confronted the governor and we said, this stuff's not going to work. This didn't work in Hartford, and here's why, and I can show you. They weren't really all that interested in that. We spoke to the commissioner, not interested. Maybe about a year earlier, I'd spoken to the State Board of Ed chair and told him, do you realize that about 10% of all of the children in Hartford have essentially disappeared from your accountability system? He said, oh, we'll look into that. Hasn't looked into that. Well, actually, I should take that back. Here's a detail that I forgot to talk about in a talk yesterday. The state actually investigated Hartford at roughly the same time that I found out about the modified assessment thing. In December of 2010, the state of Connecticut, SDE, the State Department of Ed, actually went to Hartford and did a school-by-school study to look and see whether kids were actually getting, special ed kids in particular, children with disabilities, were getting the services that they need, and the state found that they weren't getting the resources. So they were investigating. People had to FOI that particular document to find out that was happening. So where are we now? Hartford looked like this massive miracle. Stephen Adamowski looked like a miracle maker. And the state, which investigated him in Hartford for not providing the resources for children with disabilities, and the state that knew that its data was faulty and distorted, to use the kind of really low-level statistician's information, his characterization of it, they knew all that. And then they made Stephen Adamowski the special master, which basically was like the controller of all things educational in Windham, Connecticut, and now in New London, Connecticut. So I'm still trying to understand that question about why in the world would the state that had investigated these reforms under this particular person would decide to replicate them and give the guy another job. So, and I think that question needs to be asked of our leaders in Connecticut. And on top of that, why in the world would we make an ed reform law that was mirrored entirely, almost entirely, on what Hartford did and didn't really work all that